Folks that are tripping on the election of Donald Trump who act like somehow this is a deviation from America's norm, that this is somehow some unique, horrible break with the history of the country. No, the glitch was the 8 years of the Obama administration. This is back to your regularly scheduled programming. The history of politicians scapegoating black and brown folks, blaming them for problems that they didn't create, and then getting votes on the basis of that, that's not new. Donald Trump didn't create that, didn't invent that. That's been going on for 400 years, back to the colonial period, before we even were a country. So the first lesson is, don't assume that what's happened all of a sudden is a new thing. Don't be shocked by it. This is normal for America. Welcome to your country. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. Before we figured out there were other people to kill, we just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work. For the last 8 years, as I've gone around the country doing this work, talking about race in America, and not just myself, other people who do this work as well, for the last 8 years, we have been having to convince people, particularly to convince white Americans, that the issue of race and racism was even something we had to talk about, right? Because people were convinced we didn't have to talk about it anymore because a black man was president. And of course, how can we have a racism problem when a black man is president? Which of course is not something we would say about sexism in Pakistan just because a woman, Benazir Bhutto, became the head of that country not once but twice. It's not something we would say about Great Britain just because Margaret Thatcher became the head of state on several occasions. It's not something we would say about Germany or Ireland or Israel or India or the Philippines, all of which have had female heads of state. We wouldn't say sexism was dead in those places. We wouldn't say misogyny and patriarchy had been eradicated there, but in this country, that is sort of what we said for 8 years about race and racism just because a man of color was in the White House. So for 8 years, it's been like pulling teeth, man. It's like holding people's hands to convince them that racism is a thing. Okay, here's the good news in this bad moment. We don't have to convince people of that anymore, right? The hand holding, the teeth pulling, right? We don't have to do that now because it's a little more obvious to people. Now, never underestimate the ability of white folks to miss stuff though, right? So I'm not saying that everybody sees it. I'm just saying, I think it's more obvious now, and the good news, if there is some good news, is that we don't have to do the 101, right? The good news, if there is some good news, is that we now have enough evidence, the resurgence of overt racism, not only in our politics, but around our country, the resurgence and continuation, really, of systemic injustice, ICE raids on folks that have done nothing to nobody. Right? Talk of building walls, but only on this border, never this border, only this border, never that border. Because we're not worried about crafty Canadians sneaking in to take advantage of our healthcare system, I suppose, right? So we have all of this overt resurgence of Islamophobia, overt resurgence of the othering of those who appear and seem or pray or speak differently than the dominant group. So unlike the last 8 years where we were in this sort of intermission period, right? We're sort of back to the continuation of a long-standing tradition. Now, some of y'all may remember back in the day, some of the older folks in the room will remember back when Sunday football, NFL football, used to only be on CBS. This is before Fox had a license to show games, and it was just CBS, right? And there were usually 2 games a day. Now, I live in the Central Time Zone, so in the Central Time Zone, I don't know about out here, but it was 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock, right? And the 3 o'clock game, if you were on the East Coast or in the Central Time Zone, would always bleed over into the 6 o'clock hour, which is when 60 Minutes comes on, right? And so what would happen, now if you're on the West Coast, they would show it in real time, you know, because y'all were behind a couple hours, and so you could see it live. It didn't interrupt 60 Minutes. But if you were on the East Coast or in Central Time, it would bleed over, and about 6:15, the game would end, right? And the announcer would come in, and the voiceover would say, "And now back to your regularly scheduled programming," right? That's sort of what the election of Donald Trump is, y'all, just so you know. It is back to your regularly scheduled programming. It's not something new. It's not a break with tradition. Folks that are tripping on the election of Donald Trump who act like somehow this is a deviation from America's norm, that this is somehow some unique, horrible break with the history of the country. No. The glitch was the 8 years of the Obama administration. This is back to your regularly scheduled programming. The history of politicians scapegoating black and brown folks, blaming them for problems that they didn't create, and then getting votes on the basis of that, that's not new. Donald Trump didn't create that, didn't invent that. That's been going on for 400 years, back to the colonial period, before we even were a country. So the first lesson is, don't assume that what's happened all of a sudden is a new thing. Don't be shocked by it. This is normal for America. Welcome to your country, right? Is what this really is all about. We have to start with that, and we have to understand the past and how the past connects to the present, so that we can understand this isn't a unique break with history. And the reason it's important, it's not just an academic point. If you want to fight injustice, you have to know the injustice that you're up against. And if you think that it's a new thing, if you think the monster in the room is new and unique, it becomes disempowering because you don't know how to fight that monster. If you understand that we've seen this monster before, that we've seen this movie before, that there's really nothing new about this, then you can take lessons from our history about how to resist and figure out how to do that again, you see? So we don't want to build up the monster into something bigger than it is. We don't want to underestimate it, but we also don't want to give it more power than it deserves. We have to dissect it, and we have to understand its continuity, not its unique rupture with the history of this country. So let's talk about that. Because see, as a country, we don't do history very well, right? We're a very, amnesiac type of country. We are sort of like Snapchat nation, right? And I mean that not just with regard to Snapchat. You know how Snapchat, you send a video and then your friend sees it and then like 10 seconds later that is gone, right? It's just gone and it's never to be seen again. It just disappears. It's gone. I can't do anything with it. That's what we do with history. We learn history for about 10 seconds and then it's gone. And we don't revisit it. We don't, metaphorically speaking, we don't take a screen cap. We don't look at it again. We just sort of put it away. And we act like it doesn't have anything to tell us anymore. But of course it does, right? And the problem is that we have a very, blinkered, inaccurate understanding of our history, and it gets us in trouble. But if you don't understand the past, you can't understand what's going on right now, not just in our politics, but in our country with regard to race. James Baldwin talked about this many years ago, half a century ago. James Baldwin, one of the finest, probably the finest writer ever to put pen to paper on the issue of race in this or any other country, said the following about America, our historical memory, and white folks in particular, and how we as white people remember history. Of course, Baldwin, as a black man, understood whiteness better than most white folks do, right? And this is what Baldwin said. He said, "People who imagine that history flatters them as it does indeed since they wrote it, are impaled on their history like a butterfly on a pin and become incapable of seeing or changing themselves or the world. This is where it appears to me, Baldwin continued, this is where it appears to me most white Americans find themselves impaled. They are dimly or vividly aware that the history they fed themselves is mainly a lie, but they do not know how to be released from it, and they suffer enormously from the resulting personal incoherence. Now, that was beautifully written prose, but breaking it down into just regular folk speak, I think what Baldwin was saying was that when you've had the luxury and the power to fabricate your history, it not only makes it impossible for other people to live within that system, it actually makes it impossible for you to understand what you're seeing. You get trapped in your own lies. And what he was saying was that white Americans had spent so much time creating this lovely history of our past, this nostalgic fiction of our country, that we couldn't understand the injustice in front of us and how it affected others and how ultimately it would affect us. Now, what is the relevance of that today? The relevance of that pretty apparent, right? When folks walk around in hats that say, "Make America Great Again," they clearly have bought into a nostalgic narrative of America. The very nostalgic narrative about which Baldwin was writing. People who imagine that history flatters them, as it does indeed since they wrote it, make hats like that. Right? Because in order to have a hat that says "Make America Great Again," in order to believe that as a political slogan, to use that in a political campaign and have it work, you've got to have millions of people who actually think America used to be something to brag about, and then apparently the wheels came off at some point in the last 8 years. Now, when you ask these people with these hats, "When was America great? Please give me a day. Give me a week, give me a year, give me a month," they never can answer the question, because they know, well, they can, but they don't want to answer the question because they know that any answer they offer will make them sound like an asshole. What are they going to say? Well, 1955, yeah, it sort of sounds like an asshole. What are they going to say? 1923, yeah, kids were working in mines and factories at the age of 8, so you sort of sound like an asshole. You're going to say 1897? I don't think so. So the reality is that people wear these hats not because they actually are willing to engage a conversation. They use these slogans not because they are actually wanting to engage a conversation, but because they want to make a statement about their nostalgic belief in American greatness and how we have to get back to that. But if we don't understand our history, right, we can't understand how those kinds of themes continue to recur. If you don't understand the past, if you don't understand the predicate for what you see now, everything about today and about our politics and about inequality will confuse you. For instance, the very fact that a man can become president scapegoating other people for problems, whether it's Mexican folk, whether it's black folk in the cities, whether it's Muslims, whatever it is, right? The fact that you can do that is a very long-standing tradition. It's probably the most long-standing, the oldest tradition in American politics, right? Blaming black and brown folks for problems they didn't create. In fact, if you had to sum up American history with one sentence with regard to race and economics in particular, this would be the sentence: the whole history of this country is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown people. Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. Before we figured out there were other people to kill, we just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, in the colonies, the colonial elite, looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff. Right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people. Right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans. Right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude, no more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the north was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly, right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person, I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight. Because we got to maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're going to take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens? When you go out on strike, who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer. telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric, telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them, right? That's the argument. Keep in mind, there's been a net outflow of Mexican folk from this country, out of this country in the last 10 years. Right now, border crossings and actual in-migration at the lowest level they've been since the 1970s. So anybody who believes that is a damn fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone who doesn't care, right? But he says the reason you don't have a job is those brown folks took them. I got an email from a dude said this to me, it's like 3 years ago, young dude, and I knew it was gonna be crazy because it was all capital letters and right? Don't send me. If you don't like me, I don't care, it's fine. I'm a grown man, I don't really need your love or your support, but just don't send me a damn email with all capital letters. Like, you can keep the cap lock off and tell me to go to hell. You don't have to scream it, right? But this kid was screaming it, and he says, I can't find a job. Oh, Jesus, I can't find a job because black and Mexican folks took them all. Really? Blacks and Mexicans took all the jobs, all of them? Right? Then how is it that black folks and Latino folks are significantly more likely than white folks to be out of work? If that were true, why is it that black folks with a college degree are twice as likely as whites with a degree to be out of work? Latino folk with a degree, 50% more likely than white folks with a degree to be out of work. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with a degree, 23% more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work. Our indigenous brothers and sisters with a degree, 2/3 more likely than whites with a degree to be out of work. So I don't know where these people of color are taking all these damn jobs, but I know they are not taking them far. It's like they took them a block and a half and were like, yeah, I don't like that job anymore, I'm done with it, right? But this kid was convinced that's why he couldn't find work. Now, it's sort of ironic, though, because like the next paragraph is the paragraph where he told me that blacks and Mexicans are all lazy. All right, which is it? Because it can't be both, right? Because like if you took all the jobs, I'm pretty sure you're the opposite of lazy. That takes a lot of energy, running around from job to damn job. You can't be lazy and do that. And if you are lazy, I'm pretty sure you didn't even take one job, let alone all the damn jobs. I have this image in my head when people say this, right? Black people taking all the jobs. I have this image of like some farmer in Iowa getting up at 4 a.m. to milk the cows, right? And he walks out to the barn, time to milk the cows, time to milk the cows. And he gets out there, well, these cows have already been milked. Who did this? And then some black dude pops his head around the barn and goes, I did it! I took your job. Doesn't happen? Why would anybody believe it? But if a president or a presidential candidate says it, right, and you're hurting and you are out of work, it's easier to blame that scapegoat than it is to figure out that the global economy isn't made for you, isn't made for working people, whether they're black, white, or otherwise, right? It wasn't Mexicans that jacked up Wall Street. It wasn't black folks that destroyed the banking industry. That was just rich, high SAT having white boys. That's who did that. Right? It was white men with college degrees and business degrees and high test scores. They're the ones that stole or lost $12.5 trillion of other people's money. And they did all that in 18 months, destroyed the economy. There wasn't a Mexican person in the room, documented or not. Right? There wasn't a black person within 50 yards of any of them. Right? There were no Asian Americans, no indigenous people, very few, if any, Muslims in the room. It was just white, probably, just dudes that just real smart, and so smart that they lost all that money or stole it or squandered it. And I know people get very uptight when I mention that they were white. Sometimes people are like, why do you have to point out that they were white? That's sort of racist. No, it's descriptive, right? And if they had all been black and brown, somebody would have pointed that shit out. Like if it was all black people and all Mexicans, I'm really confident that somebody would have said, no more banking jobs for blacks and Mexicans, right? If black folks had lost all that money, $12.5 trillion, I guarantee you no bank would have hired a black person for any bank job, not even like a teller job ever again. That would have been it. But white guys destroy the economy and they keep getting bonuses. How does that happen, right? Because we're blaming the wrong people. We're not blaming the people at the top for the job situation that young man is facing and millions of other white folks are in fact facing. We're instead blaming the people at the bottom because it's what we've done for 400 years, right? Same thing with that border. Oh, we're gonna build a wall, that'll solve your problems, right? You think? Is that how capitalism works? Right? You think that's how capitalism works? You just build a wall and all of a sudden everybody gets a big fat raise? Is that what you think happens, right? Of course not. The corporate executives in this country are going to continue to move their jobs overseas. They can continue to send their jobs elsewhere, put their plant in another country because it's cheaper, because there aren't labor protections or environmental protections. Nothing's going to stop that. I know Donald Trump apparently thinks that sending out some really mean tweets at 3:30 in the morning will intimidate corporate executives. Corporate executives don't give a damn about his tweeting habits, man. 3:30 in the morning, Donald Trump sends out a tweet. If you got $40 billion of investment on the line, you don't give a damn what Donald Trump said. You're still going to move those jobs, right? Those jobs are still moving as we speak. He takes credit anytime a company says they're not going to move. He ignores all the times that they continue to do so. Capital will always jump across borders under capitalism. Goods will always cross borders under capitalism. If you allow goods to cross and capital to cross, but you don't let labor cross, looking for a higher wage, guess what? The game is tilted against working people by definition. And not just working people down there, working people up here, who would actually be better off with a larger, more militant working class, fighting for better wages and working conditions for all people in the hemisphere. Right? But we don't talk about that because we'd rather blame these folks. If we could just build a wall, everything will be fine. Right? Not understanding both the humanitarian component of that, but also the practical component, because that's a cheap and easy answer, isn't it? It's a way of saying that we don't have to actually do the hard work of rebuilding an economy that works for everyone.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Furaha. If you're watching me for the first time, thank you so much for stopping by, and thank you for watching the video to this point. Now on today's video we are discussing Team Wyts, and you have watched the video, you have seen what he has to say about the happenings in America, and we're basically talking about racism and what racism does to black people, and what it does for white people. Yeah, now realize that I said for white people and to black people, meaning that the people that receive the good side of racism is white people, and as for black people, it has always been the reason why everything that they do is suppressed. Everything that they do does not work out well for them. Now, let's first of all discuss what racism is and what it has done for white people and what it has done against black people. Now, the first thing that you have to put in mind is the fact that white people have always tried to make it look as though racism ended, and it has been a struggle trying to make them get sense of this, that racism did not end. And most of them actually have those arguments. And you see, he even mentioned in his speech sometime that people usually argued that if America has had a black president, then that automatically means that there is no racism, because according to them, according to such people, they think because a black president was elected, then it means that racism already ended. That is not true. Now, there's one thing that I like to say, and I think that most people need to adopt: the fact that you cannot speak about people's experiences, you cannot speak for them and how they feel. You cannot talk, for example, about a woman's experience if you're a man. You cannot talk about a man's experience if you are a woman. Yeah, there's a level to which someone can only understand things that have happened to them, that you who has read about it, watched a movie about, you have researched about it, you there's just a limiting level that you can get. Yeah, so there's an understanding, there's a level of understanding that these people that have experienced it get to understand it. And for the rest of us that are actually just researching it, we might never be in a better position to speak for them, to speak about how it feels. Now, when a white person says racism ended, it is very insensitive to black people, because you as a white person can never really get to know if it ended, because whether or not it was there, you would never experience it, you have never experienced it, and you are bound to never experience it, first of all. Yeah, so it's upon everyone else, and especially the people of the other races, and especially white people, to make sure that they're not speaking about the experiences of black people as if they're part of it. You do not get to decide for them that it ended while they're saying that it is still there. And for a fact, racism did not end. Same case that we talk about here and say slavery never really ended. Yeah, slavery, whether it's in America or Africa or whatever countries, slavery never ended. The people that were ruling that time, they're still ruling, just that they're not using the same strategies of force and stuff like that, but they will employ you and pay you meager salaries, and that is still part of racism, because they're using you for to earn more than they are giving you. Yeah, and that is capitalism for you. They make sure that you remain poor. If you are poor, you remain poor, and if you are rich, you become richer. That is the system that they designed. You see, these people were not stupid. By the time they were agreeing to, like, sort of giving people a little bit of freedom, and what people now try to imagine that is the end of slavery, actually, they had designed things to make sure that it is working for them, and it will always work for them. Now, that is why we talk about systems being designed in such a manner that it is favoring them and whatever they want. So they still get whatever they want. If it's making money from people, if it's using cheap labor, they're still doing that even today. Look at the number of people that have been employed, but they are unable to get rich from the jobs that they do. Look at the salaries that they are giving people. People are very essential in the places that they work, but the company that you work for makes a lot of money you cannot imagine, but the kind of salary that they give you and the people lower than you, it's almost like you're working for nothing. You're working for free. You're working for them for free, because the money that they are giving you can never really take you from one step to another. For example, if we're talking about moving you from the middle uh the middle people to, like, the higher rank, you're not moving, because the job is not enough to do that, because the job is not designed to make you move those ladder. You cannot do it, because they know if they make you rich, you're never going to need them. And once you don't need them, then it means that their business is going to drown. And they do not want that. So they designed a system and made sure that they're selling to people an idea that they have now, like, realized their mistake, and they're not going to enslave people anymore. They're not going to use people and not pay them. But in return, they have heightened the prices of things. They have heightened the prices of, like, houses. People cannot afford even rent. And you see how you know that you are actually operating from a very survival mode, is when you are just a paycheck away from being homeless, when you are a paycheck away from having no food in the house, being unable to pay for your school fees or the school fees of your children, when you are a paycheck away from being able to afford medical care. That is how you know that you are really on survival mode. But they have designed it in such a manner that you don't realize it unless you're thinking too hard, unless you're thinking deep about these issues. You'll never really quite know that you're. And they have also made, they did quite a bit of work, and I give that to them. They went to schools and made sure that the curriculum that is being taught to children, to people in tertiary education, they have made this thing so well defined that you are programmed to think that once you finish school, you're going to get employment and you start earning, and that's life. There's more to life than just that. There's really more to life than just earning a salary, and some stupid salary for that case. There's a lot more to life, but then you will not be able to realize that unless you're thinking deeper than everyone else. And you see, the system is designed that way. Your parents, that is exactly what they have told you. Your grandparents, that is exactly what they have been telling you the whole time. Make sure that you go to school, get a good job, and then you will be fine. You will be okay. You'll live a good life. That is all that you know. But in essence, these people are making a lot from you, and you don't realize it, and you don't even think it's wrong. Yeah? Now, that is racism for you. It is everywhere that you go. When we're talking about children in school, they're being taught, and the examples they get is white people that have achieved. There's nowhere that you'll find black people achieving, and that is instilled in them so early in life that they think that black people are not capable of achieving anything, be it white people or black kids or white kids. They grow up knowing that as long as we have not encountered black people that are succeeding at anything, then it has to mean that these people are incapable of that. Yeah. And now, when they come out of school and they have to meet all these realities, the discrimination that is at its peak, and all the things, all the manner of things that they do to black people. It concludes and it puts a stamp to the things that they have encountered in school, thinking that they are less, yeah. Even if you told them to feel that they are equal to everyone else, they wouldn't, because that is not their reality, that is not their lived experience. So that is Dr. Tim Wyts for you. He has explained whatever he has explained. I know you people love him and you love his speeches, and the fact that he's a white man that does not sit back to wait and see these white people exploit blacks is beautiful of him. And we have done quite a number of those kind of people. We have had Jane Elliott on this channel, we've had Shahid Bolsen, and those three I think are the main people that we focus on every other time, because those speak for black people. Those realize that you cannot actually speak about the experiences of black people because you have never been black and you have never experienced whatever they have experienced. And so you are never going to be in a good position to understand exactly what they have gone through. You cannot talk about racism and you have never experienced it. You cannot own the experiences. That is basically what I'm saying. I am black. I have not lived through racism and I have zero idea of how it feels like because I have not experienced it. I have read, I have researched, I have had people talk about it. But unless you have encountered it, unless you have lived that experience, you should never be quick to judge. Don't talk about racism ended. It did not. And the people that will tell us eventually that racism ended is black people. Because if they are not experiencing it and they have said that it actually ended, then it must have ended. So guys, I hope that you're keeping safe from wherever you're watching me from. Please subscribe to my channel. Be part of this amazing family. Those that have subscribed, thank you so much, guys. We are now at 12,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. I don't take that for granted, guys. I really appreciate each and every one of you for the support. Those that like my videos, share the videos to like-minded people. Leave a comment in the comment section below, whatever it is that you think, and feel free, feel easy. It's some very safe space. Say whatever it is that you want to say. If you want to rant, if you're not happy about it, if you're happy about it, just about anything, feel comfortable enough to do that. And giving me a super thanks, all that you have done for this channel and to make sure that it grows to this level right now. I really don't take that for granted, guys. I hope that you're keeping safe. I will see you on my next video. So bye for now.